It's MDO again. Welcome back to another episode brought to you by Dami Loves. On this episode, which is the second installment of Men Have Feelings 2, Season 1 of the Let's Talk series, we are joined by Peter and Josh. They explore vulnerability from the point of view of men. They also explore vulnerability and how it affects romantic relationships and also friendships. We have quite an extended chat on how we can best address our relationships and talk about vulnerability, creating safe and open spaces in our homes and in our friendships. I hope that you find that this conversation is a gap bridging conversation. I hope that it brings healing to your relationships in a godly way. I hope that you find that these episodes are balanced in their points of view. I hope that you find healing in them, and I hope that the Spirit of the Lord ministers to you through them. Don't forget that you can subscribe to our newsletters via the website damiloveslove.com, and you can send us questions, queries, or offers for sponsorship at damiloveslove@gmail.com, or you can fill out one of the contact forms on the website damiloves.com. Do enjoy the episode, and I hope to see you next time. Today we are joined by Joshua Komolafe and Peter Ayani to continue talking about this subject, vulnerability, and men have feelings too. We're going to explore what vulnerability means to men, how it intersects, and how it portrays itself in relationships as well. So we're going to hear from Josh first of all, and then from Peter, and we will then take your questions which you've all sent in. So welcome, Josh. Please tell us a lot about yourself before you jump into the topic.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me, Dami. I'm really privileged. I think I'm gonna come from a very unique angle, seeing that I'm engaged to be married. So thank you. So I'm looking forward to that. My camera's higher than my laptop, so in case I'm not looking, just let me know and I'll look. So I am an entrepreneur. I describe myself using 3 tags: orator, pioneer. Thankfully, I'm privileged to do quite a lot. So sometimes I struggle to put the things under a box or an umbrella, but essentially I help young adults and young professionals to discover what they're good at, to operate from their best, and to find fulfillment through leadership and training in the areas of, through training and development in the areas of leadership, public speaking, purpose, and branding. Yeah.
Awesome. So tell us about vulnerability. What does that mean to you?
The words that come up to me, that pop up in my head, are safe space, trust, and also experiences. So I think those sum up the word or the term vulnerability to me in particular.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of in relationships, how does that then bring itself out? How does that portray itself? Especially, you've said that you're engaged to be married. How does vulnerability then portray itself in your relationships with other men and in your relationship now in your romantic situation?
I think every individual, man or woman aside, depending on your role in life, your responsibilities, your view on vulnerability will differ. So personally, I'm pastor son, and I was sharing on this a few days ago. I have gotten to a place very long time ago, whether I like it or not, it's the life that's chosen me, where I have trust issues because, well, fortunately, my parents have done well in ministry. And so what that's meant is I don't know who's real. I don't know who's trying to get to them through me. I've had to always have had my guard up. As a firstborn and only son as well, it's something that I've had to really be very careful of, protecting my sisters. So for me, vulnerability looks very different for me and my life and for someone else. So I have understood the notion of perception and how people perceive one, and and that's branding in essence. I'm going around the circle, but I'm, I'm going to land. So for me, it was very important for me that when I got into a relationship, it was someone that I fully could trust, that wouldn't take my matter somewhere else, that understood my public life and my private life.
Yes.
I've been very much condemned. People have called me diplomatic, or you're an ambassador. It's the life that it's the life that's chosen me.
Yeah.
And side note, a lot of people in that kind of position where their parents are in the public eye and they've not had a choice, they struggle to handle life in general, but then the issue of vulnerability. Because that's why I spoke to that, because I think it's something that, regardless of your sex, your gender, your place in life and your role, your responsibilities will determine, your experiences will determine how vulnerable you're willing to be in any situation. And then coming down to being a man, especially in a godly relationship, or just as a man that's a Christian, I think we have that notion, having read the scriptures, that man is the head of the home. You're meant to work together, but there's a kind of responsibility on the man's shoulders. Adam was made first, and so on and so forth. So there are times when I've seen this play out with my parents, when there are challenges at home and everyone's trying to work through that. But then when a new challenge comes on, as a man, you think, I don't want to overburden my wife or my spouse or my friend. I need to be a man and take this on and perhaps share this later. And, sometimes we fall at that hurdle sometimes, because we sometimes take too much on in the need of trying to be a man and take on the responsibility. So yeah, that's a large view. Then I think in relationship, as I've said, having someone that understood and understands my place in life, whether I like it or not, and also where I believe I'm going, that's really helped me. There's other things I want to say, but I think I might wait till the questions before I say too much. But in overview, that's what it is for me, and that's the view that I've come to understand, and I truly sympathize. Or is it empathize? Empathize, yes, empathize with men and women who, without their I'm looking for the right word, without their permission, have had to take a certain stance, especially because of the circumstances surrounding their birth, or what they do, or who they are. And I think that really dictates. It speaks a lot about what we're willing to do and how open we're willing to be. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you came from the angle of your family of origin, and the business that they're in, the service that they do as well. And a lot of people do find that is quite difficult. Some people have friends who don't know who their father is and who don't know who their mother is, because they don't want there to be that problem in terms of, is this person going to violate my trust? Is this person going to take advantage of knowing who I am and knowing my weak points? Are they going to use that against me? Are they going to use that against my family? And it then becomes a place where we're then trying to bridge that gap in terms of, I can't really be known if I'm not vulnerable and if I don't open myself to trust. But then how do I pick the right people to then say, this is who I am in entirety, this is who I am totally. Do I trust you enough not to violate that? So how do you get to that point? How do you pick and choose people who you then say, this is me, this is who I am, in addition to, I also carry this, it's a good burden, but I also carry this burden of knowing who my parents are or who my family is. I have this name that goes across with me. How do you merge the two?
It's an ongoing journey. I don't think anyone has a perfect answer. I have to keep reminding myself not to allow some previous experiences to make me shut off completely. So I'm always mindful of that. But I pick up a lot on character traits. I try to observe people. For me as a Christian, I look at your displays of the fruits of the Spirit. When you've been someone's really pushed you and you have every right to be angry. How do you react? So with individuals and friends and colleagues, I'm always watching to see how they respond, and that gives me an indication of this is someone that I'm not perfect myself, but you want to be around people that understand. And I think for me, the biggest thing is values as well. When you find that you share the same values with someone, it's easier to open up because you're not gonna. It's very frustrating and mentally draining, and you have to argue, discuss, and it's like, no, this is what I meant. Oh, no. So when you find that and the scripture says don't be unequally yoked for that very reason, because after a while it's just too much. You're just like, yeah, I need my space. So when you find that you have the same values, for me, that's really helped me as a discerner to be able to say this person is someone I want to attempt to get close to. Sometimes that's proved wrong. We've had the same values, but the character has been a bit. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I've also probably done things wrong as well. But that's helped me to decide who I can trust. Also, I'm of this notion of before people knew what you were doing and who you were, who was close to you then. So before I started in business, I had friends that, understood, and I've kept in touch with them. And, I think that's...
Yeah, that is great. Definitely looking for the fruit, and that will definitely guide. So we're going to go over to Peter to ask about his views on vulnerability before we jump into our juicy Q&A. So tell us a lot about yourself, Peter.
Thanks for having me. And it's good to be on a at least with another esteemed gentleman who has opened the floor quite well. By trade, I'm an aircraft design engineer. And I've gone in from there to sort of within the realms of business management and change transformations and such like. I am a design enthusiast and into music. I play a couple of instruments as well. So I suppose, yeah, that's me in a very, very in a nutshell. My main instrument is a keyboard, piano, but also I can find my way around the drum and around the drums and the bass guitar. So yeah.
That is really awesome. So tell us, what does vulnerability mean to you?
I think for me, it's being authentic. I think that when we're at our most vulnerable, it's when we're most authentic with ourselves. And that's the best way I can sum it. And I suppose a lot of the times when we talk about vulnerability, we tend to talk about it in terms of a negative or a sort of a handicap, as opposed to a strength. And for me, it is, and that's the best way I can describe it. That's the way it feels to me. Am I always vulnerable? No. I think that, just picking it back off the discussion you had with Joshua, I think that you need to also apply wisdom to it, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that one is not vulnerable or the other. It just means that there is a place for wisdom. And I don't even mean it in this sort of, in the Christian term of it. I just mean in terms of just normal relations. But being vulnerable for me means being authentic, owning all of your stripes, owning all of your mistakes and your flaws and whatnot, as well as your strengths, the highs and the lows. And I think when you're at that point, you're the freest you can be. You're at a place of strength, regardless of what station you are in life. And I think I'll stop with there for now. I mean, that's how it feels to me. Yes.
Okay. And how does that then portray in terms of relationships? So either at the beginning of a new relationship, let's say a romantic relationship, or halfway through, how easy is it to then be your authentic self?
I think what makes it more interesting, and I'll come to answer your question, but I think what makes it interesting is that all of us in society, um, in a lot of ways, are masking our vulnerabilities. So we're always trying to put our best foot forward, right? And so we're sort of all playing this game, like some are doing it consciously, some is unconscious, and the other part of it is we are working off the vibe that someone else gives you, right? So you look at someone else and they show you their best side, then you're less inclined to show them your ugly side. And so everyone is playing this game where, and so you find that those who are comfortable with themselves have this natural pull. They just draw people to them because you can see their stripes. You can see they've come to terms with their goods and their bads. And it's a different thing where some people would be sort of lazy or just say, oh, that's me, and just take me as, and then I don't mean that. I mean in terms of they understand that they have weaknesses, they understand that they have strengths and such like, and so they are comfortable with themselves as opposed to sort of just coalesce into a state that I just which is again another sort of form of playing this game that I'm just gonna stay in this lane and you like me or not and stuff. So and when you bring that into the context of relationships, it's a case where at the start of it, everyone's putting their best foot forward, right? It's a game that everyone is playing. We're all putting our best foot forward, and as we, and this is what I mean by wisdom. The more I'm comfortable with you, the more I'm able to be my true self with you, and the hope is that as the relationship progresses, the more I reveal more of myself to you, and we get to a place where we're quite comfortable, and I can, use this sort of Christian term to open my show you my nakedness, and likewise, and so it's a case where at the start, that's what happens, and there is an innate part of us that is designed that way, right? So I'm trying to gauge who you are. I'm trying to understand who you are before I can show you all of me, and that is not to say that I'm not being vulnerable. That is just me being wise in terms of this is how just to be to protect myself as well. And so I think that's how, at least in my own, as it pertains to me, is when you meet people for the first time, it's a case where you're putting your best foot forward, right? And that's the way we've been designed. But the hope is that the more we get to know each other, the more we're comfortable to expose and to reveal who we truly are. I must say, one of the things that, okay, maybe I don't know if I should say it now or just one of the things that we struggle with sometimes is, even when we delve into the realms of being authentic, a lot of the times we don't have a language to process or to accurately articulate who we are, what we've been, and where we are at that point in life. And so even though the intent might be there to be vulnerable and to be open, we just don't know how to. And that comes across as not being sort of vulnerable or not being authentic. And the final point to make is, like to answer your question in terms of relationship, is that it's sort of very mutual in the way it works, in the sense of, if I open up myself to you, I give you permission to open up yourself to me as well. And the whole idea is that, when you come into a relationship context, when you meet someone for the first time, yes, we play this whole game, everyone's trying to put their best foot forward, and my good side and all that. But then as the relationship progresses, and one of the things that we have to consciously do as well is to get the best of the other person, to know them at their most authentic self. I have to give them the permission by by opening up myself as well, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you said that in terms of who opens the door first. So in part one, we had another Josh on as well, Josh Ablady, and he was talking about how people often ask in relationships, so who said I love you first? And it's sort of a tester of seeing who actually put themselves forward and who was willing to say, okay, this is me, this is who I am, this is all of me, and are you willing to accept me for who I am? And that is sort of where vulnerability comes in and intersects. But another question to you, Peter, is how does that then portray itself in terms of your male relationships and in terms of showing your friends, your male friends, who you are? So let's say friends that you've known for years. So let's say your high school friends, over the past 10 to 15 years. Where does vulnerability play a role, and is there space for vulnerability in those relationships?
I think it's more pronounced with my male friends, in terms of the whole permission thing. With guys, we could be together and we could, we would have a good laugh. We'll argue about, football and basketball and everything. And what you find with guys is that, once someone opens up about something, then you see the domino effect, and everyone is like, oh yeah, everyone, and the gods, calm down. And so it's even more pronounced with guys. And I think, here's the other thing. Again, one of the things with guys is, the way we're built is and this is a very wild generalization, but there's some truth to it. We would like to, like even Josh alluded to it, the man of the house, you're supposed to be strong, you're supposed to be all of these things, right? And so what happens is that it over time is built these sort of things that, a facade, or that it's not real. And what happened is, when one person gives permission for one person is being, it delves into the realm of being authentic with themselves, and they open up, you begin to see the domino effect with guys, in how they begin to open up. Some would do it by, just a tacit, yes, that I've been in that. Some might even go even further to jump into that pool and be like, yes, I'm in this with, and so I think it's even more, you see that happen more, the shift happen more dramatically with guys. I think with ladies, it's kind of very subtle in how that works out. With guys is, we're it's kind of like we're on and off switch. We don't have this kind of dimmer there. Like once someone goes in there, everyone is sort of into it. So I think if I get your question right, how does it play out with guys? I think it's even more important in terms of my relationships to be as open and as authentic. Give you example. We could be together, and once one person, it's not the best of examples, but hopefully you'll bring the point home. If one person talks about like their financial situation or their work situation or how they're dealing with, investment, you find that everyone starts to open up about their story. Right, everyone starts to open up, like, okay, so how did you do this and what's going on? When one person opens up about their relationship, and I'm talking, and I mean this within sort of the confines of relationships that you've built over time, that you're safe in and such like. When one person starts to open up about their relationships, you begin to find that you give other people permission to do the same, and that's where the real support and the real depth in the relationship is built.
I love that. That is really interesting. Josh, do you agree? Is that sort of the same? Does that replicate itself in your own relationships with other men as well? That domino effect that Peter was talking about.
Yeah, I think it does. I really love the use of the word authenticity that Peter used as well. I think, and as he rightly said, the confines of you trust them already. But once that's the case with most men, yeah, you know, the domino effect, it does kick in.
That is awesome. And what about emotions? Either one of you can go first. So emotions in terms of tears, in terms of sadness, in terms of expressing sorrow, loss, grief, with either your male friends or female romantic relationships. How does that come through? One of our panelists on part one said men are afraid of tears, full stop. It's not just the tears of women that they're uncomfortable with, they're afraid of their own tears as well. Do you think that is the case from your own perspective, and why do you think that is?
Peter?
Yeah. All right. That's a big question, right? Emotions, right? And it's not one dimensional. And emotions is just a bag of contradictions and so many things happen at the same time. So here's the thing. Like, let's start with the final statement you made around tears. I do agree with the person you referenced in terms of I think guys are scared of, like, well, I'll speak for myself. Like the female tears, 100% scared. Don't want it to happen. Don't want to say it. Please, does yeah. Whatever we could do to stop that from happening, we would do. I think when it comes to that, especially when someone you care about, you don't want to see them in tears. I'll be honest to say I'm a crybaby, so tears for me, nah. And listen, if he has to, so I my tears, not too worried about it. I think here's the thing. I would do a lot of that in private. All right, I'll do that in private. There are certain times that the emotion might be overwhelming and it might come out in public. Hardly would you see me do that in public, except in sort of worship and stuff like that. But not. I'll do that in private, and what men would do, and I suppose again, this is me as a very wild generalization. I don't think men are scared of their own tears. I think they would rather do that in private, process the emotion, and find a way to articulate it in public. And the articulation might be silence. The articulation of it might, if they're able to find words to be able to sort of make it make sense, then they would. But I don't think, at least maybe as a guy that kind of roll with, I don't think they're scared of tears. I think what we see more often than not is that they will do that in private. Or within the confines of someone that they really, really love. But in public, yeah, you probably wouldn't see that. Perhaps it will either be, at least not tears, well, it depends. Again, like I said, it's a very loose generalization because, you know, emotions, it could be, you know, sorrow or the loss of someone. It could be, tears of joy. It could be some, you know, deliverance from like an issue that has persisted for a long time. So again, it depends, right? So it's a very, very loose generalization. But I think more often than not, I would lean to the fact that men would like to do most of that in private and find a way to just try and make sense of it when it comes to public and try and we might not be good in terms of how we articulate it. It might not be as eloquent or as polished, but most of that will have been done in private. And I suppose you could sort of extend that to a lot of the emotions as well. We tend to do all of that because, you know, we're very logical. And so we tend to sort of do, at least, let me speak for myself and again, use that as, tend to do all of that in private. So when we're driving, or or whilst we're doing other things, physically we're there, but our mind is somewhere else, trying to process and trying to make sense of a lot of things. And I think that's what you see with, at least with tears, that we will like, do that in private, and when we come out, we hope that we've found a way of sort of making sense of whatever the situation is. And what we present in some cases might not be what is expected from us in that situation, and hence, men are from Mars and women are from
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. What about you, Josh?
I'm always annoying with my responses because I've learned to stop apologizing per se. It's not my fault. It's the life I've come to live. I found that I've had to guard myself a lot. Okay, there are two answers for me. First of all, I'm very expressive as a human being. If you spend time with me, you'll realize very, very expressive, very jovial. You'll see me laughing a lot, smiling. So in terms of expressing my emotions, I don't have an issue expressing my emotions personally. But then my perhaps sadder moments, I've learned that unfortunately, sometimes when I have expressed sadness or the weight of concern has been more than I would have liked just because of where I find myself. So to avoid that, I've learned, like Peter said, wisdom on where you can unleash, and it won't be read into too deeply. And at the same time, I think it's great that we're able to talk in the context of Christianity. One of the things that really helps me on a day-to-day basis, and when I've gone through periods of grief, were being able to worship God in private and really pour out my heart to Him, and let myself open my tap, empty my bucket in His presence, and then during the day, I'm not feeling the need. I don't feel deprived of being able to release my emotions. And in that moment, I'm the most authentic I can be. I'm acknowledging God for who He is. I'm talking to Him, in the rawest form. There's no polish. There's no snort coming from my nose. My tiara. So I think that is one of the biggest tools that men in the world, but they're men in Christianity, need to understand and take advantage of. When we're able to really let go, it really, because whether we like it or not, the responsibilities for man, they're not going to go away. In a sense, God gave them to us, from the beginning. When you look at Genesis, the way the man was made first, responsibilities were given to him. You read further on in the chapter, Adam calls Eve, this is what you are. He speaks into her life and really so there's a big responsibility on the man. And I'm very passionate about leadership, and there are certain principles that the leader has to live by if you want things to be successful. For example, you realize that if you so I'm privileged to lead the young adult church in Manchester, where I'm based, and I've come to understand, if on my Insta story I do stuff in the radio station, when they're playing songs that the song is nice, but I said the lyrics, Sandy. So if I put it on my Insta story, I've just given everybody else license to also, I can't speak on that anymore, if that makes sense. So I'm very mindful. So I think as a man, whether we like it or not, the responsibilities and the expectations by God, first of all, forget society and all the pressure. This is a God thing. They're there, So we have to remember that, because with the responsibilities come the perks as well of being able to. So, for example, in a godly marriage, you're working together with your spouse, but women at all submit to your husband. You know, if he says this is the way we're going, you have to cry in your room or accept the way. You know, you can't enjoy the perks and miss out. So I think with the responsibilities come that notion of, whether you agree with it or not, of being able to be strong. You know, unfortunately, people go through scenarios like, in a marriage, your wife suffers a miscarriage. You can't then, you know, also she needs a pillar to lean on in that period, you know, and at the same time, you're going through the grief as well, for example. So you need to find a way to, you know, be strong for your wife, but also let out your emotions, if that makes sense. So I think, yeah. But personally, I'm very expressive. I, you know, laugh, cry with my fiancée. See me cry several times. You know, this boy. You know, but yeah.
Sorry, can I jump in before you? And more of a question, right? And I'm sorry, I know you're the host, but I do have a question, right? One for Joshua, one for you. And I mean, one for Joshua. It's okay. Question is, and I do apologize, but I just don't want us to miss this point, right? Is you spoke about sort of leadership and sort of the role of the man. Kind of want to just get your insight in terms of, how do you reconcile the two in terms of leadership and vulnerability? In your opinion, how do you navigate and how do you reconcile the two? And I suppose for you, Dami, it's a case where, based on the example that Joshua just gave, you know, like a woman, like there's a, God forbid, a miscarriage. What would be your expectation from the man in terms of showing vulnerability?
Okay. I mean, that is a very easy question. That is a very easy answer. In terms of being a rock, I think a lot of men want to be strong for their wives. They want to be strong for their woman. They want to be the shoulder that they can lean on. And yeah, that's great. But we don't want someone that is not going to cry if something like that happens. And so I'd want both of us to sit down together and cry together.
All right.
Yeah, and then pray together, and then you know, and then make a plan. Are we going to try again now, or are we just going to wait? You know, I definitely wouldn't want a man who just says, "Oh yeah, you're going to be fine. What do you need? I'll go get it," without showing me that he has felt this loss as well, because that was half me and half him that was going to produce. And so, if he then becomes detached and doesn't share in my sorrow, I'd question, do you actually love me? Did you want this child? You know, those are the kind of things. And so a man might feel, oh, he doesn't want to look weak, or he doesn't want to make me feel that he's not strong. But actually, I want to see that you are invested in this also. And I think a lot of women come from that point as well, where they want to know that you actually care. They want to know that you felt it too. And so, yeah, so definitely showing some kind of emotion, you know, in a way that a woman will understand it, is so important, definitely.
All right. I'll cue you in with that, because she just set you up. She's like, I want you to cry.
I'm going to answer your question, but I think one of the points I was going to make for the questions later was, this is deeper than sex and male and female. We need to look at individual personalities. So men are supposed to be supposedly vulnerable, not vulnerable, and we keep quiet. I'm a talker. So, and thankfully my fiance really appreciates that. And she understands, she's also a talker. So when we have chat, it's like, yo, sit down, let's talk, you know. And I don't like leaving things in the air. I want to talk. Let's get down to the minute details. What happened here? You know, what was the problem? This is how I felt. So I think I've also found that I've spoken to women in relationships in the past, whilst I've been in relationships, and they wanted me to listen when they had issues. My fiance wants me to listen, but then also speak back and encourage. So I was like, okay. So if we go off the one size fits all, that's the challenge that I've come to understand now. Then you can miss it, because you'll miss it and think the person is mad and say, what's wrong with this individual? you know, it works with this person. Why aren't you a woman or a man that understands this? And aside from the generalizations that we give to men and women, I think we really need to take time to study our partners, study our family members as well, because it's not just about relationships. To understand, there are different psychological tests on how to, nothing is perfect, of course, but one that I really ascribe to is the Enneagram. And I really, really like the classifications there, and it's helped me to better understand my fiance. But that's on one side. So, Peter, the question you asked.
I thought you were going to skip it. I was like,
do you mind rephrasing the question?
The question I asked was around how do you reconcile leadership, leadership, I suppose, and by extension, the role of a man, as you sort of emphasized, and vulnerability.
I think as men, we need to embrace the responsibility more. And, you know, I was studying James, listening to the audio Bible this morning, James, and he said, not many of you should ascribe to be teachers because you're going to get judged more than other people. And, you know, you can't run away from it as a man. I think that once you want to get into a relationship, you will have the responsibility of being a leader in the home. And so there are times when, against your will, you will need to stand up for your spouse or for your girlfriend or fiance. And there are times when, for example, your wife is the kind of person that needs you to be a rock. And if she sees you crying, she breaks down more, for example. And you're the kind of person that wants to cry with her. So in that moment, being the leader and taking on that role. And I think, you know, it works vice versa as well, because there are times when the man is down and needs support as well. This isn't just the women are, yeah. So, so I think it's about understanding what's required in that time. Also matching that with your responsibilities. One thing that's helped me and my fiance in particular is we've come up with this code word. And we've communicated. So we had a discussion on the difference between honesty and transparency. And we said, honesty is when you're asked, you tell the truth. But transparency is going out of your way to say, this is how I feel, this is what's going on. And so we decided very early on, based on our experiences, to adopt a transparent relationship. And so we came up with this code word that we use when we want to be transparent and vulnerable. And when that person, whenever one of us says, oh, you know, I don't want to say the word, I'll just say X. The person says X. And I'm like, oh, it gets me ready. I'm like, okay, here we go. And at that time, part of our discussion was whoever's listening at the time shouldn't condemn, shouldn't be listening to respond. So it's a conversation. So communication is so key per relationship, per individual, per friendship as well. You will know how you relate with each individual, and tie that in with your responsibilities as a man. I think you can't escape from that. And at the same time, let me leave it there. Yeah. So I think that's it for me. Many women on the other angle, they don't like the issue or the concept of submitting to their husbands. They just can't fathom it. And as a godly Christian woman, you read through the scriptures. In fact, your heart anyway should be should be changed and willing to. But the issue of I was independent, I was doing this by myself, I did this, I did that, I suddenly come with a man and I just have to, have a discussion if he thinks this, and I let go. In the same manner with a man, with the responsibilities that come in leading, I think it's something that we need to take into consideration and own more, I believe. I could be wrong, but that's my view.
No, I really love that. Thank you, Josh. And I love, how you talked about in terms of addressing it from the point of view of the personality of the person that you're with, because you might be with a man that is never going to cry, and that doesn't necessarily mean that he's not feeling that loss as well, or communicating how he's feeling. And that's the transparency that you're talking about in terms of your relationship, that letting the other person know how you're feeling in the way that you're able to. And I think sometimes, as Peter said, we don't always have the ability or the vocabulary to articulate what exactly we're feeling. And that is both for men and for women, in as much as for men it seems to be a bit more in terms of finding the vocabulary to express their emotions, but sometimes some women also feel stuck in terms of how am I going to say what I'm feeling in a way that the other person will understand. And it's not always just with words. A lot of times communication, we can say a lot of things, but we're not actually getting the message across. And so giving that space in that room and a safe space to discuss what exactly is on our minds is so important. So I'm going to jump into the questions now. And I think Peter already addressed one of the first questions in terms of giving a false impression at the beginning of a relationship and turning around. And I think that goes to trying to put your best foot forward. But the next one is, do you feel the pressure from society to get married as single Christian men?
Peter?
Do I feel the pressure from society? Honest answer would be no. And I suppose you take the widest sort of concentric circle of society. For me, is no. The closer that circle becomes, the more there is a perceived pressure to get married. I suppose it took a while to get to this stage. If you'd asked me this question a few years ago, I probably would have given a different answer. Because you get to understand that, the same the same sort of insecurities I have, majority of society are dealing with their own insecurities. And so a lot of the pressure is, sort of a projection of what it is they're going through or what they think and an expectation and such like. And so, but the closer that circle becomes to the point that it gets to just me and myself, I suppose the more the pressure is, and the more sort of the pressure. And I suppose you're asking it from the outside in, I suppose from the inside out. But for me, I think that would be the answer. It's I don't think it's a sort of black and white. It's the closer it gets to that inner circle, to the point that to family, to parents. So the closer that circle gets, the more sort of the pressure is, whether it's vocal or not.
What about you, Josh?
Before I answer, just to add, for people watching this back, I'm not, man press the woman down, because I realize how my tone can sound. Submit to your husband. Man is the, I just wanted to clear that up.
If it sounded extreme, I would have come in, so it doesn't sound that.
Just clearing the air. I think the only pressure I feel is the pressure not to sin. If it was not a sin to sleep around and to be promiscuous, I probably wouldn't get married. And I'm just being honest. If God had laid out other things for us, and and that wasn't one of the, probably wouldn't have got married. So I think out of my fear and reverence for God, the pressure to get married is so that I don't sin. Aside from wanting to build together, I can be very romantic. I love rom-coms. I want to go out to a day. I want to go cinema. I want to, so, Having a girlfriend and stuff wouldn't be far away from me, perhaps, but locking myself into that commitment for life comes from my trusting God and saying, this is God's way of doing it, and I trust God completely. Aside from that, no, it's no question for me.
I love that, and I mean that is scriptural, because Paul does say that instead of burning in sin, go ahead, get married, and do it the way that God has ordained. And the next question is, what steps have you taken to be more emotionally mature and responsible?
Josh.
Communication.
Okay.
Yeah, communication. Again, from the onset, learning. I think first of all, before we even get into relationships, friendship, family, whatever the relationship may be, we as individuals need to get to a place where we understand ourselves. We know what we're like in the good times. We know what we're like in the bad times, so that we can clearly communicate that to our partners, to our friends. And I think that conversation is an ongoing one as you change throughout your relationship together. But initially, it's when I get angry, I like to go for a jog, So in that moment, your spouse or your girlfriend isn't taking it out of proportion. He just needs to breathe. We've had this discussion. He's putting on his trainers. He said, okay, I don't like to go for jogs, as you can see. I've not jogged for a while. I'm just giving an example. But I think that notion is important, first of all, understanding ourselves, to then be able to communicate that well with our partners, so that when we do get to those moments, there's clear understanding. But then also, as I said before, having the language, I think that was so key that Peter mentioned earlier, coming up with a way. And I was going to show the book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. There's a chapter he speaks on love letters. And that was so key for me. One of the key points in the book, and he literally gives you points on how to write your love letter to your spouse, so that you can be a bit more vulnerable. It gives you a language to express your emotional thought or space in that present time. And yeah, I think that's I was talking to one of my friends a while back before he got married, and he said, there are several good women, but this was the good woman for me. And once you've understood yourself, you realize that, and it's not bad necessarily. So for example, I'm quite jovial. Some women don't like that. For example, it's a bit too much for me, it's good to play, but this one is a bit much. So when you discover yourself, you're able to say, okay, this is again on a value system. This is someone that relates with me value-wise. I can match up with this person, so that even when you are trying to be more emotionally mature, I've been in instances where my attempts to be mature was seen as immature by someone else because of my approach, So I think that's the other dimension to it. Once you understand, so I'll summarize, once you understand who you are, how you function, secondly, you're passionate about communicating that and finding vices to help communicate that better. And then thirdly, very importantly, especially in a relationship, you discover if you match value-wise, because even if your method is good, they might not like that approach, and that's okay. So discovering that, okay, we match up on this level, these three levels, and we can move forward. Yep.
That is great. What about you, Peter?
Oh, sorry, if I get the question right, the question was around
what steps have you taken to become more emotionally mature and responsible?
More emotionally mature and responsible. I think, and I'll piggyback off Joshua said. At the very basic sort of elementary form of it is self-awareness. In the sense of just getting to know yourself better. There are a lot of this is where some people stop, right? This is this is who I am, take it or leave it, and all that. And which is sad, because the journey could have been a lot more fun if you'd sort of, because I think that on one hand is self-awareness, on the other hand is also the education, right? If God would decide on the first day that we give our life to Christ to, as the Bible put it, come live in us that is unrefined and unpolished, and he would take us, he decides to put his treasure in us and then work with us to sort of polish us, to make us that mansion that it is sad that we would just get some sense of self-awareness and think that's us, and just remain that way. So I think for me, it's where at the very basic level is, all right, self-awareness, but also dedication in terms of working that work and that journey. Because here's the sad part, all right, someone can say, oh, I'm just this, but then you're only just that because that's where you are in life. Right? You grow, you have new experiences, you meet new people, and what you think you were, that's not, doesn't fit with who you are right now. And so it's a case of, and if you keep holding, if you sort of you just hold to that template and you're like, oh, this is who I am every time, it's like, listen, you would not fit the environment that that you're supposed to be as time progresses. So and that's why you see that people around will look at you and say, yeah, that look quite immature. It was because you stuck to a manual, an SOP, an operating sort of process that doesn't just fit with where you're supposed to be. So it's at the very basic level is sort of self-awareness. Next to that is dedication, and saying, all right, okay, I want to know, how does this work, right? So you give example of the book, right? You're reading books, and and that's where you begin to sort of get a language or a vocabulary to help to express yourself, to help to behave in a way that's commensurate to the situation, to the environment, to the people at that at the point in time. And so I think for me it's just that point. And here's the interesting part: the beginning, the moment you start that journey of sort of of education and trying to figure out and really digging in and putting in the effort, you begin to realize that what you think or who you thought you were, it's just that's not who you really are. And you might find your starting point might be okay, a good sort of frame of reference of who you think you are, and then like the wise, the more they learn, the more they realize they don't know, right? The more they realize that actually there's more to this than I thought I knew. And so I think for me is how it's, again, it's I say this and it sounds kind of polished, and then I'm like I do this every time. Nah, the reality and the truth is it's you getting it's more of an inward journey, if that makes sense. It's like, all right, and you self-awareness in terms of this is, and you begin to discover more of yourself as you go along, but also putting in that place where you grow, putting yourself in a situation where sometimes God would make it happen, sometimes life would just make it happen, and sometimes you have to be deliberate in making it happen and putting yourself in situations where you grow, either by picking up a book, by the interactions you have, by the friends you keep, by the things that you pay attention to, TV, whatever you think about and worry about or meditate, whatever way you choose to look at it. And I think that's, for me, that's the way that I would say I am going about it now. I didn't always, if you asked me this a few years ago, I probably would have given you a different answer. But this is where I am right now. And I'm sure if you ask me the same question in a few years, I might come up with a different answer. But I suppose at the very basic level is, self-awareness, but then subsequent to that is really growth.
Yeah. And
sorry, I just want to jump in there. Sorry, Dami. I remember watching this video a few years ago of 5 men. They were all over 30 years in marriage. I can't remember how many men, but it was sat around a table, Christian men. And one of them said something which at first I said, huh? He said, my wife has been married to 5 different men. I said, excuse me? Have you seen that?
Yes.
And
Oh gosh.
I think John Piper was in it. I can't remember.
Was in it. It was, oh gosh, he wrote The Meaning of Marriage. Timothy Keller.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and at first I said, what kind of man that allows? So he said, I've been 5 different men at different stages of our marriage. When we had kids, when I had my midlife crisis, when I got my first job, I said, okay. And my wife has had to adjust, and, you know, vice versa as well. And, you know, Peter, what you said is so key about, yes, you discover yourself. Yes, you start to educate yourself, but there has to be room, which I think is the final step you alluded to, Peter. There has to be room for accommodation of growth. And that same room, in that same room, there's a corner, or a large space rather, a cupboard, for understanding and accepting differences. I think that is where most people struggle, that start to educate themselves. You know, you get to that sector and you say, no, I don't want to change. You know, this is my fix. You know, and as Peter rightly said, as Christians, as you grow your walk with the Holy Spirit, and, you know, the fruits of the Spirit become more evident in your life, fruits of the Spirit, and you start to understand, you're more patient, you know, you realize that actually I can accommodate more than I thought, you know, and things like that. So leaving that room and being sure. For me, the ultimate key for me is, I don't know the future, only God does. As human beings, we have the now and the hindsight. We're very good at checking data and history. Very, very good. Only God knows the foresight, the future. And so because of that, when it comes to relationships, for me, you know, this is a slightly off tangent. I need that assurance from God that this is the person. I can go ahead in this direction, because as I grow, as she grows, we don't know what that's going to look like. You know, even our value system that we said, oh, we match, you know. So for me, the only thing that we can both hold on to is our faith in Christ, knowing that as long as we keep pursuing this faith in Christ, no matter how different the expression looks, we know that at least the same Bible says, man, love your wife, wife, love So, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, that is excellent. And then the next question, I'm going to merge two. It says, what's the right way to respond to vulnerability in a man? And what are the responses to vulnerability that we should avoid?
Peter?
So what was the second question again, please?
The right way to respond?
Yeah.
Was what kind of responses should we avoid?
So what kind should we avoid? Whew. All right. Here's the thing. I think, if I may sort of reframe and rephrase the question, is what is the right way? I'm sure there are people who aspire to me and who God has anointed that have, you know, whittled it down to, you know, 5 points. You know, these are the 5 points that you have today. I'm not that level, right? So, but here's the thing. Here's how I would put it. Josh just mentioned about relationships and marriage and such like, and I think, and in terms of, you know, God has and knows, He's the one that has foresight. But I think it's also, on one hand, it could be daunting in terms of that relationship work, you know, your partner for life. On the other hand, I think it's the adventure and it's the excitement, right? In terms of, hey, we don't know what it's gonna be. We just know that we're in God's hands, and everything will work together for our good. There's certainly going to be a lot of good times, we hope, but there's also going to be some times that will be trying. But if we're in God's hands, then He will see us through that. And I suppose when you have that, sort of mindset in mind, it's a case where, how do you respond to vulnerability, or what are the right ways to respond to vulnerability? I think one is, first of all, you know, is that whole space, or that you're in the safety of knowing that God will make everything work together, right? I think, and also it's important, and we've said it earlier, is that I give you permission to be you by being my truer self, right? And so, again, like I said, there's people who are smarter, who have walked this work, who God has anointed, and they've literally does a few things. But I would like to think that, part of the response would be that I am also my truer self, right? And because I give you, it's a subconscious permission for you to be open, for you to, and I think that in a lot of ways, when that is there, how do you respond to a man being vulnerable? I think it's more a case where some like that's why I said it's the the question is sort of alluding towards the fact that I have this sort of menu of options and I can pick one at any point in time. When first of all we've earlier established that people are different, right? So what worked for person A might not work for person B. What worked for person C might not work for person A. And so it's a case where I don't know if there are a set menu of options that I could always go, yeah, you know what, I got this. This needs a 2-2-1. That's what we need for this situation, right? I don't know if that's possible. So I don't know if there's what's the right way. First for me is, all right, being my true self, and two is also giving because first of all, I give you permission to be yourself, and also it's giving the person some space to be themselves as well, right? There's a part for permission. There's also a place for space, right? You have to give them space to really, if they don't want to cry, give them space. Be there. Just be the time they want to be. Just give them space. I think those would be high on the list in terms of what I think should be the right responses. And second question is, what kind of things should we avoid? Here's the thing, and I'm hoping, and I'm guessing you're asking in terms of a context of relationship where there's a love and there's that safety that has been established. The benefit of doubt is it's huge. To say that I suppose their heart is in the right place and they just acting out different. They don't just have a language. They don't know how to express what it is what they're going through. Their heart is in the right place. They just don't know how to express it. They don't know how to articulate it. They don't know. And so, it might come across as they're, trying to tantrum or, trying to talk, whatever it may be. And so sometimes you just give them the space. What you don't want to do is to, want to diagnose every, action and want to interpret it and want to, because the thing is, if here's the thing, right? If here's an example that we did, right? Joshua, you said something and you weren't sure if it came across as I'm not a guy. But here's the, in a safety of relationship where we all know each other, we give you the benefit of doubt. And so even if you say something, we'll be like, nah, we know him. Right, we know we give you the benefit of that, and we give you the space to be who you are. What we don't want to do is, because you said something, then everyone is trying to correct you and be like, "Oh yeah, you said about women should give their life to Christ," and and so what that does is it results in a different reaction because we're not really what happens is that we're only sort of dealing with the symptoms and we're not really dealing with the problem. Because if someone had jumped in and was like, oh yeah, so are you saying that women should always be like subservient to their husbands? And that would take this whole conversation like another 3 hours talking about something else that we didn't even plan to talk about. And so I think that what it is again, that's why the context matters. Even the context of a relationship where there's love, I think the benefit of doubt plays a big part. What you don't want to do is the opposite. Not give the benefit of doubt, and not giving the benefit of that. Some might interpret it as the gift of patience or long suffering. Call it what you will, and well, not call it what you will. It's the Holy Spirit that will develop this and grow these fruits in you. But I think the reverse of it is something that I think we should avoid, because if their heart is in the right place, and that relationship is founded on God, or God is the center, the core of it, and the sort of protector of that relationship, giving them the benefit of doubt would work out, would pay off in the long run.
That's great, Josh.
I think we've touched on the notion of knowing the individual, knowing the personality. So that will dictate how you should respond, I think, in most cases. No one size fits all. That said, following what Peter said, in economics, when we studied, one of the things my teacher used to say all the time was, these are just models. Human beings are irrational in the sense that they don't follow the, procedure. We should buy when this goes up, when this goes down. And we don't always do that. Sometimes when the interest rate is high, we still go out and get our mortgages because you just want to, for a trend that exists, for something else. So even despite knowing your spouse or your, in the context of relationship, there always has to be that human beings are irrational mindset, such that there should be room for your partner to be different. I don't want to say wild out or act, mad, but to be different and not necessarily follow the rules. And I think there's for women, because we're talking to women now, for example, I've said to my fiance, I'm a talker, but there are times when I don't want to talk. I need to process what's going on. And so she needs to, I think one of the words is emotionally intelligent, to pick that, okay, he's usually a talker, but in this moment, for this particular instance, this is how it seems might be best to respond. At the same time, I think there's need for, in this time, people are very quick to exit divorce when it's not working. There's the need to throw the key away from the beginning and accept that if that's the case and that's where your mind is, when your spouse makes a mistake, you're willing to sit down with them and say, or for example, they responded in a manner that you didn't quite like to your vomit. You're willing to sit down with them and say, at a future date, and say, babe, you did this. I would have loved if you did this. That I know it's difficult. This, yeah, and the following lines are I think those are key for me. Having that heart of forgiveness and that readiness to, despite how you feel and the hurt. Of course, I'm talking now. I've not been married, so I don't know the kind of. But I've spoken to people, and the way they've described it, they said, Joshua, the pain, the pain. So having that heart, being ready to, that heart of Christ, to, he's paining me, but babe, I love you. So I think that's it for me. And then one thing that you shouldn't do, women, a lot of women like doing this. Don't go and tell your girlfriend or this is what's that. Don't do that, please. Oh God, don't do that. Don't break the trust. I think that's the key. It's a safe zone. If he finds it comfortable, you've created a space for him to really let himself, be emotionally raw and be transparent. Don't break that trust. You take, and it can be quite painful and it's difficult to heal. If you've experienced that, you should still be willing as Christians to, let your heart go through the process and get back to that place. But it's difficult, please, yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much. And the final question before we jump into advice to single ladies, how have you developed emotional intelligence? Because obviously that is so crucial in terms of vulnerability, understanding where someone else is at, and also understanding your own response to a situation, and also gathering information. So a lot of times people say, men don't, go to relationship seminars. They'd rather go to a finance seminar than go to a relationship seminar. They'd rather read a book on investing than read a book on relationships. So how do you then develop that desire and that interest in terms of learning about relationships, learning about the way men and women process information differently, and how to then bridge that gap so that your communication with your female partner is actually effective.
This book is where you learn. Honestly, when I read the book, okay, there are quite a few books I would prescribe.
Yeah.
One is 5 Things I Wish I Knew Before I Got Married by Gary Chapman. That's a really good book. Sorry, I like to read. I've developed this habits. This book really helped me to understand that we hear it when we listen to seminars and preachings, but he went down to the core. A woman, when she's telling you her issues, she has the solutions. Don't give her solutions. As a man, it's like, why don't you just turn left? And it's like, babe, I already knew that. I just wanted to talk to you. So I think educating myself has been key to understanding that actually. So now the challenge I had was I used to feel really bad. And it's like, I need to cure this. You can't, how can you tell me this and I don't respond? It's like, oh my God, but I've learned now to just be quiet, sit still, and listening takes on different terms for different women. And you have to, again, communicate and understand what that means and looks like practically. But I've just learned to listen, and they usually tell you what they want and what's happening, and you just flow it out. Okay, that's good. She said, oh, what do you think we should do? I said, what do you think? She said, no, but I was asking her, I was like, I know, but don't you usually like this? Then she goes off after 5 minutes. Yes, we should do that. I said, okay, that's what I do. So for me, educating myself has helped me to calm down, appreciate the differences more, and sorry, do you mind repeating the question? So I just...
yes, the question was, how have you got into that journey of emotional intelligence in terms of getting information and understanding how to bridge the gap between the sexes?
Yeah, I think that's I've said the biggest. Anything else is more specific to the individual.
Yeah, that is definitely key in terms of women telling someone a problem, and we just want to talk. A lot of times, we just want to talk about it. We just want to ventilate, as opposed to we've already decided what we're going to do in most situations as well. What about you, Peter? Any response to that question?
Like I said, there are people who are smarter, like Joshua, who have written it down. Even the example he gave, that was so apt. It was like he's mastered this thing, or he's mastering it. I suppose, here's the thing. I'll be honest to admit that it's still something that I'm still trying to figure out myself. And not because, I'm still trying to figure out. Again, it might come from an academic standpoint, or I might sound academic about it. But I suppose it's something that you keep learning, right? And like Joshua said, it's there's the education that comes with it. There's the part of just the art of being a good listener. There's the art of being changing your language, and it doesn't really mean that you have to, she's saying everything and you're like, that's all you said throughout the whole time, but it was such a good discussion and you didn't even say, you just nodded, really, so you don't mean it. So and that's like, and in your mind you're thinking like, I haven't even said anything, but she's on a roll, right? And so, but here's the thing, right? Communication, a lot of times people look at communication as, you have to speak. You have to say something, and communication is a lot of the times is not, even though the best parts of communication are not audible, right? It's the best part of where the real juice of communication is the inaudible sort of part of it, and it's something that at least for me, I know I have to learn. I do read books and such like, and I know I have to, instead of spending another 20 years trying to figure this out on my own. Is really picking, God has given a lot of richness of wisdom to a lot of people who have been able to sort of articulate it in a way that we can, learn and practice. And so I think how have I gone about, developing sort of EQ and bridging the gap between men and women to a large part is one is the grace and the kindness of God, but also it's also kind of putting yourself there to learn, right? I do feel like the way God teaches us, like a lot, he doesn't use harm to teach us lesson. He uses frustration sometimes where you have to, it's frustration situation, or he brings people around you that would kind of hone you and such like. And sometimes we could speed up that process by being cooperative, by taking a step back and say, what am I not getting right? And if there's something, then go look for the wisdom, right? God has given it. Get the book, get whatever, and speak to people who God has given that wisdom. So yeah, I rambled my sort of I just fumbled my way around that answer, but I don't think it's too dissimilar from what Joshua said. A lot of ways is the education, but also not discounting the work of what God would do through His Spirit in you if you submit to Him.
Just to honestly, this book changed my life. If you don't have this book, please go and get it. It's quite thick. It takes a while to read, but it's worth it. One of the things that he spoke of, he described the man cave, and also spoke about the woman's elastic band as well. And when I read that, I said, okay. The fact that sometimes, and one of the things, I'll mention the solution before I describe, one of the things that I want us to keep doing by God's grace, but one of the things that's really helped us in this period is fasting. We periodically fast, and the time spent away from each other, it's like, there was so much gist. I've taken my notes. If this happened today, oh my God. We get back and it feels fresh. He spoke about how sometimes a woman loves you, but she also needs her time away. And, don't feel bad. He also tied that in with she can just suddenly feel annoyed or sad just randomly, as women do, and telling us how to deal with that. In those moments, she needs a hug. She needs reassurance. And so I read it. I said, okay. Sorry, I'm going to speak French. Abajo. I said, right. This makes sense. So that honestly, like, as Peter said, people have gone ahead of all of us. We are all still learning and we all make mistakes, definitely. But it just helps to articulate some of the supposed chaos that we can see, and the things that we don't understand. And, it's really just, and Peter said something which I'm going to be vulnerable and admit. Times before now, I've made some silly mistakes. Oh my goodness. I remember a lady would tell me, Josh, you don't listen to me. I said, I'm listening. I'm even telling you response. I'm giving you solution. I'm not listening to you. I said, what do you mean? And, I'm here. I'm looking at you in the eyes. They said, look at them, eye contact. So from the frustrations, I've now come to this place. And I remember I was pouring stuff out to one of my friends, my female friends. And I said, how can this person do this? This is not this. And she said, Josh, you need to read this book. And she actually got the book for me. And, so yeah.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for sharing that as well. And just before we go, if you could give Christian single ladies advice, any dating advice or any insight into Christian single men, what would it be?
Peter?
To men or to women?
Advice to women. No, advice to women.
Advice to women.
About Christian single men.
Here's okay. here's my advice, right? I think whilst we have God who, and I don't mean to, whilst we have God who, with Him at the center, um, we can go through whatever circumstance may come our way. I also think that a good relationship, it's not just a preserve of Christians. Because a lot of the prevalent advice you hear in church, and prevalent, and again, very loose, wild generalization, is only about the God side, the Christian side, and not about the people side. Just being a nice person, just being someone who is invested in having good relationships. And not just good relationship because I'm just nice, like we've spoken a lot about, I'm not saying there's nothing to that. There's a huge part that plays to in terms of relationship, but I think that a lot of the times, at least my experience, is that when we speak about relationship in church circles is around the Christianese side in inverted commas, and not about how to just have a good relationship. How it is that my response could solicit it plays a big part in how you respond or react to me. In terms of understanding how people think and such like. So I'm grateful that, we kind of laid a lot of emphasis around the education, and I don't mean education in terms of the formal side of it. That's I hope, people get what we mean by education. I don't think like good relationships, it's because if that's the case, then you will never hear of a divorce. You never hear of an unfulfilled marriage, or you never heard of of people just having really horrible times. They might be the best in terms of prayer, they might be the best in terms of church activities and all the good things that comes with being a follower of Christ. But when it comes to just being they just don't know how to do it. And I think that there's a huge part that we have to play, and that is not to say that God is not involved. I think it's a sign of respect, in the sense of, because God is involved, you would give it more attention, you give it more credence. You would, not to suffocate it, not to sort of become rigid about it, but really, because listen, if God would entrust you to be in someone else's life and to be able to shape and mold them, do a good job of it, right? And so I think so. So I see all of this to say this, that I hope we're not just staying just in a place of prayer and not putting the work, and not doing everything, that just being a good contributor, because it's not just the what happens in your relationship is, I suppose, a snapshot of how you deal with people at large. And so, yes, again, I would summarize to say that there's some education, there's some learning, there's some development, there's some growth. Now, what the Holy Spirit will help us to do is to be able to sieve out what to pay attention to. It's like, yeah, that makes sense, and that makes sense, or that is consistent with what the Bible says. Because if I applied that, if I use that with the wisdom, then it's not just it enhances the journey. It makes me a lot better and such like. You get the point. On the other hand, so that's the first point. The second point I want to make as well is, and I said at the start, right? I think there's also a place of putting your best foot forward as well. I think there's also a place for that. I think the Bible couldn't be more obvious, right? The Bible says that man looks at the outward and God looks in the inside. And here's what you hear often. I just want them to know me for my personality. God just told you that men look on the outside. He literally just said it. and so we're like, I just want to be a nice person, just want to like, listen, put your best foot forward. Men look on the outside and God looks on, let God do his part. You play your part, right? And again, I'm not saying that to discount the other. I'm just saying, like, this is the wisdom that God has put in the scriptures, right? And what you often hear is that I just wanted to just know me for who I am. If they know me for, I'm really a nice person. Yeah, but okay, let me. I won't belabor the point, but you get the message. This was the third thing, and perhaps the final thing I would say on this is have fun. Have fun, right? Like, um, yeah, you have to. Um, I God made us social beings, right? He made us. That's the way He designed us to be. We're at our best when everything is working well and we have good relationships. And I think that you should have fun with it. And then I'm supposed to go in with it with a very sort of rigid sense and very, because what happens is, whether you like it or not, there's a message that you put across when you don't seem to be in a happy place with yourself. And I suppose it kind of brings, sort of brings it together with a whole place of vulnerability, right? The people that you're trying to impress, they also feel with their own insecurities, right? Everyone is kind of their own insecurities. Some people just know how to just put it together and mask it quite well than others. And if you really get to see them like at the true self, you'll be thanking God for your own life. Like, whoo, okay, I thought I had it bad. Like, so I think, like, yeah, have fun with it.
Yeah, that is amazing. Yeah, thank you. So God looks on the inwards, and man looks on the outside. Yeah.
I mean, it was literal. Like, you didn't even have to like read into it. Like, was it the Greek? Was it the Septuagint? Was it the Hebrew? Nah, he just kind of threw it out there. Like, yeah, okay. I mean, give an example, right? If someone's looking for like a scriptural reference for that, Ruth in the Bible, right? Naomi told Ruth, like, listen, go, have a shower, put in your, adorn yourself well, and just go hang around the dude, just hang around. He might notice something. Hey, all right, I won't belabor the topic, but yeah.
Yeah, that is, yeah, definitely. What about you, Josh?
Yeah, there are quite a few things you said there that I resonate with, Peter. I think you mentioned the fact that, I have this notion that I live by. We're spirits that have souls and living bodies. And we say it in church, but we don't really live by it. And Peter, you mentioned that, we're so spiritual with the prayer, the fasting, we also have souls, and we have feelings, we have passions, we have, let's take advantage of that. One of the things that really brought my attention to you, Dami, was I kept seeing your display of Song of Solomon. I was like, this is good, yes, because it's in the scripture. If it wasn't there, then you say, look at this heretic, where is this coming from? You read Psalms, you look at the poetry, the way David talks, and it's like, wow, enrich your souls, yourself and for your spouse or your partner. Make them happy. I personally love fashion. I love the nail painting. I love everything. Do it. Change the hair. Let the perfume. I want that smelling. So, it let my soul feel good. I said, that's a good one. And again, likewise, the body. This applies to the man as well. We've been having a conversation about how I need to start jogging, but that's another. Like taking care of yourself and not necessarily letting go. I'll leave that point there. That again applies. I think for me, the route that we take to marriage will not be the same. We need to be very open to the Holy Spirit, and I've had this conversation with one or two women that I know, and I've said, because it happens, very rarely, but it happens, where God is calling you to perhaps walk alongside a brother, help him, see, this is, take this as you will, okay? Because people are going to be shooting me. What are you talking about? You're not supposed to change him. Be very sensitive to the Holy Spirit. There are certain people that you've heard testimonies. This man was here. The woman invited him to church, showed him a discipleship class, and he, found himself in Christ and decided, this is actually the woman I need. And, the routes we take to marriage won't be the same. For most people, that's the exception. For most people, the advice I would give is run as fast as you can, as hard as you can in Christ, and then turn to the side. The person that you see is most likely the person that. So, because the challenge we make, or the mistake we make, is we approach it from a different angle. Whether we like it or not, life is about the purpose and the reason why we were put on earth. And everything that we do will be accounted for at the end. And God is going to say, what have you done with what I gave to you? And it is pleased God in his infinite purpose that as part of that journey or that race that we're running, marriage has tied into that. So as you're chasing that thing that God is really showing to you in your life, whether as a woman or as a man, you're running and pursuing and seeking after it with all your heart. As you turn to the side in that same direction, someone else is chasing something similar. It makes life easier when you realize that we're thinking in the same direction. There's certain things about my future that I know, and I shared with my fiance, and she said, well, to be honest, I knew this about myself. I said, great, we connect. This is making sense. So be very mindful of that. I think for me, another point is that when the romance dies, your friendship and your covenant with God will sustain your marriage. So first of all, your friendship will sustain your soul. You can laugh together, you can have fun. But then when times get tough, you understand and remember your covenant with God. And that takes the notion of, I want to get out away. That does not exist anymore. Dare I say, even if they were, they cheated, even if, dare I say, you get to that point where it's like, look, lock the door, let's sit down. What was the problem? What happened? Let's sit down and sort it, So dare I say. Another thing that comes to me is when it comes to relationships, one of the most important things is hearing from God regarding that spouse or that partner. A mentor of mine told me his experience when he asked me to hear from God. In fact, he made me get the word before sharing this experience. He said he got married to his spouse, and a week into the marriage, they were literally in the honeymoon. He lost all interest for his wife. He said she didn't do anything wrong. He just couldn't explain it. He just didn't desire. And I said, And he said in that instance, or in that moment, having struggled for a while, he went to God and said, but God, I'm sure you told me about this woman. And he said, in that moment, that feeling of I don't want her lifted. And he told me, he said, the only thing that sustains, that's true, that's secure, that's stable, that does not change is God's word. Your emotions, the circumstances surrounding how you came together, your value system, everything can change, can crumble. The devil will always beat you on emotions. He'll always beat you. He told me something else. He said, God forbid you're having challenges in your relationship and you go to God and say, what's going on? I need your help. And the Holy Spirit says, but we never gave you permission to get with her. I said, He said, if man offends you, you can go to God. But when God says something, where do you go next? So, of course, there's a place of mercy. But if you have the opportunity to decide now, you've not made the decision. That's one of the most important things. Make sure you hear from God regarding your spouse, to make sure that the word from God is real. And that goes into the conversation of hearing from God, which, good luck, you can go and research on that yourself later. But essentially, when we have that word, in our moments of doubt, we can go back to that word and say, but God, this is your word. Your word never fails. You said you'll honor your word over your name. I bring your word back to you, and yeah. I think for me, I've said it. I think that's it for me. The reminder that, like Peter said, marriage is not just for the for procreation and for sustaining Christian race or Christian group or circles. There's more to it than that. Everything in life is intentional. God has placed us here for a reason. We need to discover that reason. Even in our marriages, there is a purpose, and we live with that consciousness in the back of our hearts. And allow that to direct after our salvation. The second most important thing is purpose, the reason why we're here. We live with that in our hearts, such that resources to be directed at home, you're doing it from that mindset of what is God calling us to fulfill and accomplish in with our relationship, even before marriage, in courtship together. What has God said we should do in this moment? And you live from that place of understanding to really move forward and advance. I think that's it for me.
Sorry, if I may just sort of add to some context. I mean, yes, we joke about it in terms of, and thanks, Joshua, for laying some more emphasis in it. We joke about it in terms of, man looks at the outside and God looks on the inside, and it could unwittingly sort of drive the pressure to start sort of putting out a front that is not genuine. I think this is beyond, for me, the way I see it is, it's being, here's how the Bible put it. He would say, the Bible, and Paul would say stuff like, live up to the calling of what God has called you to be, right? Is that if you are a king, live up to that calling, right? If you are a prince, if you are a princess, live up to that calling, right? And so it's a case where, again, going back to the whole really finding out who you are, and I suppose you can't do that without the help of the Holy Spirit, but it's a case where you realize that, listen, I'm of a different ilk. Like, I'm different, right? I can't just, and it's not a case that you're just doing it, just, you're putting, slapping on this and slapping on that just because you want to grab a man, and then once you grab a man, then happy days. But it's more, I don't mean to be that callous about it, but what I mean is, it's a case where you live up to the calling, right? And it goes beyond just your physical adornment. It's a case where you realize that some people, just the way they carry themselves, like we could both wear the same thing, but the way someone carries themselves, it just gives it a little bit more. There's a grace and an aura about them, and it's more a case of living up to the calling of who God has called you to be. And it's not just, okay, there's wisdom in it in terms of, all right, when it comes to relationship, but there's also the wisdom in it in terms of how you represent yourself, how you represent God, how you carry yourself, and all of that. So again, I hope that we don't sort of assume that everyone sort of understands the heart of what we're saying, but at the same time, it's more a case really to say that God has, whether you feel it or not, whether you are there or not, it's a case where there is something that and again, I'm trying not to use the sort of church language because I don't want it to be too Christianese about it. It's a case where you live up to the calling. Certain things that, so like we're talking about some arguments that you just be like, nah, it just doesn't phase because I'm different. I just don't have the mental capacity to get into this. I don't have the just to spend my time with saying things, and it's just the way we carry ourselves. That's it. There's the physical dominant and all of that we've joked about, and yes, I think it plays a part in it, but more to the fact of living to the fullness of who God has called us and created us to be.
Sorry, I'm so sorry, Danny. As you were talking, it just hit me because what you're saying is basically it's difficult to do when the person that you want to get and lead with believes something else, especially when it comes to spirituality, as I call it. And obviously, like you said, the Bible will talk about not being unequally yoked. Because even when you perhaps say, this isn't a conversation we need to argue about, to someone else that doesn't have an understanding, it's like, what do you mean? And it's just unnecessary. So I think that's another angle to what Peter's just said, which I think is so key, and we need to stress in these times. And unfortunately, I've seen so many friends and people that I thought, this person is lovely, and it sounds very arrogant as Christians, that we think we're the best, everybody else is bad, But if you take it on a purely value system, if you want to approach it from that manner, we're taught as Christians, when you're slapped, turn the other cheek. Someone else is saying, revenge, go and fight, kill them back, just based on, just using that as an example. If that's the person you're getting with and this is what you think, there's going to be a problem, So just on that basic level. And life is so complicated. As you start to approach some of the challenges that come your way in relationship, it's nice to be able to say, okay, this is how you were raised, this is how I was raised, but then this is our rule book. Let's go back to the rule book. What does the rule book say? The rule book say, okay, fine, you win. Okay, that's good. And it's just nice having that referee, if I can call it that, and that I think is really key as well, that many single women, men as well, but we're talking to women, really need to understand and accept that God's wisdom is the best form of wisdom. Whether we understand it fully or not, we should trust him and follow through.
Yeah, that is awesome. Thank you so much for that. I think that is a perfect place to end, in terms of the Bible is our rule book. It is our referee. And we can always go back to it as our reference point. I absolutely love that. That is totally tweetable. The Bible is your referee. I love that. Thank you so much to Peter and Josh for joining us on today's episode. And those of you who are still dating in lockdown, make sure you register for us to arrange some amazing dates for you guys as well. Thank you. Thank you so much, guys.